Good morning everyone and welcome to Androidizen Live episode 6. I'm doing my best for Movember for supporting men's health everywhere, hence my Freddie Mercury today. So, coming up on today's show, we've got a little bit of this, Angry Birds Star Wars 2. We've also got a look at the new COD, which is okay. A game that is guaranteed to annoy absolutely everybody, Contra, because I don't think there's anybody who can actually play the thing well. And a bit of Dead Trigger. And, if this works well, we'll also be taking a live look at GT Racing 2 from Gameloft, their answer to Gran Turismo. This is actually running live off my Android device right now and into our editing system, so we'll be bringing you a little bit of that. Also, everything today is about Nexus 5, so if there's something you would like to ask me about the Nexus 5, anything you'd like me to take a look at live on the device, do let me know and I'll be happy to take a look for you. So, first up, let's have a quick look at an absolute classic in the making, which is of course Angry Birds 2. Well, Angry Birds Star Wars 2, to give it its full title. Obviously, when George Lucas decided he'd had enough of the Star Wars properties, he sold it to Disney, and Disney immediately said, how are we going to make back this $4 billion in a year? And the obvious answer there is license Star Wars to absolutely everybody. So, the guys at Rovio had obviously done a great job on Angry Birds Star Wars 1. They've then come back and they've done a sequel. And it's all pretty much the same kind of thing. It's Angry Birds, destroy the piggies, and do it with a variety of new kind of power-ups and weapons for your Angry Birds. Obviously everything takes on that kind of Star Wars vibe, so you've got lightsabers, you've got Jedi Force powers, and it generally feels like Star Wars, but done with Angry Birds. It's all just very cute and wonderfully well thought out. You kind of get the sense that Rovio have got so many different things they can kind of do with the Angry Birds franchise that it's going to be sticking around for a very long time to come. Certainly, it doesn't appear they're running out of ideas anytime soon. If they keep extending it with new kind of conceptual worlds like Star Wars and some of the other big properties out there, it's going to be around for a very long time to come. They've kept the gameplay fresh. Things like, obviously, Yoda Bird there, who has the ability to act like a kind of boomerang, really does create some interesting gameplay opportunities. One of the things that they have done is added a kind of pay-to-win store in some respects, where you do earn credits that you can use to basically unlock special characters like Luke or Leia, Angry Bird, and those can be used effectively like the old Golden Eagle, I think it was, of old, which would allow you basically to quickly clear a level you were stuck on. Now you get a certain number of credits as you actually play through the game, so it's not like you have to put your hand in your pocket to actually, win certain levels. But obviously if you're the kind of person that loves spending money on these games, or if you've run out of those free credits it gives you, then you can put your hand in your pocket and support Rovio that way. But there's also the pay for title, as it were. There's the free version and there's the pay version, and it really just depends on your style of gameplay. If you're the kind of person who quite likes the free to play titles and the challenge that goes in there, then you can just grab the free advertising version. But obviously if you want to support Rovio, put a few quid in their pockets, buy the game outright, always worthwhile. And you can see here some of the special power-ups, or power-up Angry Birds as it were, that you can get in the Angry Pigs, or evil pigs, I don't know. Are they angry? Are they evil? They're thieves, who knows. Moving on is Call of Duty's first kind of full foray onto the mobile devices. They obviously did release that zombie shooter game, which was atrocious. I was having an argument with a friend the other day about it, and I'm afraid I simply can't accept it as a Call of Duty game because it was just a zombie shooter. Doesn't matter if you state Call of Duty at the beginning of it, it's still a zombie shooter. It's not COD. And so when they released the COD tactical shooter kind of game, I kind of found myself going, it's still not COD. It's sort of COD. It has occasional COD-y elements to it. You can jump into first person and go and have a run and gun around, but the game is too difficult to just do that the whole time. So you're required to kind of jump into this tactical view to move you guys around. Overall, the graphics aren't particularly great. They're certainly not up there with titles that are being released at the moment, things like Dead Trigger, etc. The lighting model and texturing in this is pretty ropey. Although, funnily enough, it's actually very COD-ish. You know, if you've played the latest COD on PC, Xbox, PlayStation 3, etc., then you'll know the graphics aren't particularly great anyway. Certainly, if you compare them to something like Battlefield, nowhere near as good right now. Overall, with the COD game, it's not a complete disaster, but it is very expensive. It's a premium title, costing around £5. And yeah, there's plenty of gameplay here, but it could have been so much better, I'm afraid. It does feel to me like they kind of didn't put enough effort into optimizing the game. Either that or their game engine just doesn't run particularly well on Android. There's a lot of really strange bugs, unfortunately. For instance, this one that's just coming up now, where at times the lock-on that you have on the side of the screen that allows you to quickly hop and lock between various enemies gets a bit confused, and you end up shooting at a wall, because apparently the system will lock onto people who are through walls. Why? Why is there no occlusion here? Ultimately, it kind of makes the game more difficult to play, and it kind of ruins the experience a little bit. They could have done a better job, and it just seems to me that that was kind of like a throwaway thing. Oh well, we won't bother fixing that. There is no way you should be able to lock on to people through walls like that. It's a bit of a game breaker, really. Not to mention just looks damn sloppy on the part of the developers. But overall, it isn't a bad game. It's just a game with a lot of rough edges that kind of lead to an experience where you think it's not really worth a fiver on mobile. If they kind of offered something like this on one of the traditional platforms, console or PC, it would be getting a really poor Metacritic score for things like that, and reviewers would be rightly slamming the game for being a bit sloppy. There's a lot of really cool moments in the game, and it's got that kind of Call of Duty interactive cinematic thing going on that's really, really cool. But ultimately, the game is a bit of a letdown. It would have been much better as a pure breed shooter, going up there with the likes of Modern Combat 4, which is still, in my opinion, one of the best shooters that we've had on mobile. Now, moving on to a game that is just the ultimate example of frustration. I know what they were going for. This is Contra, by the way, Contra Evolution. The hardest game ever created. I believe it might be in the Guinness Book of World Records as one of the only games to never be beaten. Purely because it had a bug, which meant that you couldn't actually beat it. But what they've kind of done is they've remade the game, they've released it onto mobile platforms, and it's just as flipping hard. Presumably they fixed the issue that meant the game wasn't actually completable. But the thing is just so ridiculously difficult that you end up just getting frustrated. This is the first level, and it's as far as I've ever been able to get. There may very well be some of you guys out there going, oh, you're playing it wrong, etc. It's like, well, if you need sort of some kind of mad tutorial or hundreds of hours of gameplay in there to actually get to grips with the game, then it's not really a pick up and play friendly mobile title. It's colourful, it's really fast action, everything like that, but it's too difficult, in my opinion. And it's not really a pick up and play title for the average gamer. Now, one I've been absolutely loving through the last couple of weeks really is the new Dead Trigger. They've done a wonderful job with it. Not only are the graphics quite literally the best I think I've ever seen in a shooter on mobile, but the gameplay is just fantastic as well. It does have in-app purchases, so I'm afraid there is a kind of pay-to-win formula kind of going on here, and the game does become reasonably difficult later on. But the developers have responded to that, and the latest update they added about 3 or 4 days ago did fix the kind of difficulty balance quite a bit. For instance, the special zombies, the radioactive zombies, the screamers, and some of the others have been toned down. They're less bullet sponges than they used to be, meaning you're not going to use as much ammo taking one down, and so you won't need to be dipping in there to your credits to try and get enough ammunition to complete levels, etc. And generally meaning you're not going to die as much, meaning less health packs required. Overall, it's good to see that developers are really listening to the community and, tuning up the game as necessary to keep it fun, but obviously still make themselves a few quid. Overall, I really love Dead Trigger 2. I mean, from what I've heard, it plays even better on, obviously, the Tegra 4 console, portable consoles, as it were, things like the Nvidia Shield, the Nvidia Tab. But that's not to say that running it on something like the Nexus 5 or Galaxy S4 or HTC One, that you really can't tell a massive difference in the graphical quality. It does look a bit better, maybe the frame rate's a little bit tighter, but it's not something that in my opinion is a massive leap. It's not quite the same leap we saw when we were around, I think, the Galaxy S3 and the Tegra 3 on the Nexus 7. There was quite a big difference in the graphical quality. You can see here in the lighting and spectral mapping, I think it is there, that the lighting quality and so on, it's very atmospheric. Everything just works beautifully in my opinion. Here's a bullet sponge boss. This footage is caught before they did the update, by the way. So this boss, well, this special zombie does take a fair amount to take him down. And, you know, overall, they've done a great job with the game. And these are probably some of the most accomplished developers out there. One of the things I found quite interesting with Dead Trigger 2 is the way that we now have kind of our own little team basically who do all of our upgrades for us and so on, sort out our missions, and it creates a bit more of an engaging story than we've had previously. Obviously it's a bit of a loose story, end of the world, zombies, last survivors, etc., but it works and it helps to create a sense of belonging to this world as opposed to kind of just a series of strung together missions like it was before. And also when you have these sort of elements here, this sniping level is just incredibly good fun, and again it kind of shows that the developers are working to create more variety in the game than just the usual kind of dungeon crawling maps that, you know, we've kind of got used to. It shows they've put the time and effort into producing a really top quality game. So now let's have a look live, shall we, at GT Racing 2. So if this works, and bearing in mind this is the first time we've tried to do this live as it were, let's going to jump into a campaign. And I'm just going to grab a level that I haven't actually done yet because, you know, it's always good to progress. I've played for a couple of hours on this one, so it's reasonably fair to say that the game is incredibly well done. It's by Gameloft, so you might want to hold your wallets very close to your chest and keep them locked up because, you know, Gameloft do really like to fleece your wallets as much as possible for credits, etc. It is a free-to-play title. That means that you are going to be dealing with in-app purchases a lot. Now, just excuse me, I have to look down while I'm doing this so I can actually play and talk at the same time. If I watch this back through the monitor we have set up, then there's a bit of time delay and I will just keep crashing into walls. But the graphics are absolutely fantastic. You're actually seeing this on the Nexus 5, which is why you've got a slight black bar down this right-hand side. Unfortunately, Gameloft didn't decide to incorporate the new Android 4.4 full screen mode, which is a bit of a pity. It would have been nice if they had, given that that is now rolling out to so many Nexus devices. And obviously the Google Experience devices over the next couple of weeks. Hopefully they'll do a post-update for this to enable that. But graphics wise, it's really, really good. I mean, you thought Asphalt was good. What they've done here is really kind of upgraded the polygon count, in my opinion, on the kind of world. So you've got a very, very detailed and realistic looking environment. Really nicely designed cars as well, obviously riffing heavily off cars that we can buy today. This is an Alfa Romeo, for instance. But the frame rate stays really solid throughout. Unlike Asphalt 8 that could occasionally dip on the Galaxy S4 in places, not massively, but enough to kind of make me go, It does seem like Gameloft have done a good job at kind of optimizing this title as much as possible. And perhaps that's coming partly from the Nexus 5 and obviously its very, very fast Snapdragon 800 processor in there. Let's just drop into another race, shall we? Let's do the oval. This is quite good fun. Just a straight up speed race effectively. But gameplay wise, it is Gran Turismo on mobiles. The original GT Racing was alright, wasn't a particularly brilliant title, it was very laggy in my opinion. Where this does feel like the graphics of Real Racing 3, but better. The frame rate is a lot more consistent. I've tried Real Racing 3 on the Nexus 5 and I found exactly the same problem as on every other device I've tested it on. Coming into the first corner, when the fill rate goes really high from all of the cars in front of you, you get a very slight stall and stutter as it goes around the corner. And I've seen none of that with GT Racing 2. It's just fluid the whole time. And I say, even Real Racing 3 on the Nexus 5 was displaying that issue. It's pretty much an engine problem, as it were. Not car engine problem, a graphics engine problem. And that's very much down to Electronic Arts, in my opinion. Speaking of Electronic Arts, what happened to Dungeon Keeper? because it was meant to be starting a rollout worldwide, and I still haven't actually seen it. I must go and check whether they've finally completed a worldwide rollout or if it's still just in Poland and New Zealand. That's a game I'm definitely looking forward to. If anyone remembers Dungeon Keeper, Peter Molyneux title from, maybe 11, 12 years ago now. Really was an absolute classic of the age. But as you can see, I mean, this car is bombing along quite happily, and the frame rate is staying beautifully consistent. One interesting thing that I'm going to mention, for those of you that do capture directly from your Android devices using capture cards, the Nexus 5 doesn't use MHL, it uses something known as SlimPort. Now the difference there is MHL is kind of a standard, which they've got a separate working group for it, companies join and they pay a license fee from what I can tell. SlimPort is kind of more of an open standard, anyone can incorporate SlimPort, they don't have to pay a standard, they don't have to follow any particular set rules from what I can tell. Now the interesting thing there is, a Galaxy S4 on an MHL port, the frame rate that I get on the device starts to drop slightly. It kind of seems to cap out at about 30 frames a second. Now you won't really notice that on YouTube because YouTube footage is 30 frames a second. But I can notice on my device with the Nexus 5 and a SlimPort that my frame rate is still chocking along at 60 frames a second. Absolutely fine, even though I'm also outputting to a HDMI, capturing that and streaming it to the web. So partly I'm wondering whether it's SlimPort, partly I'm wondering whether it's the Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 processor that's just a lot better. Obviously having a lot more clock cycles there on the GPU and CPU, it's able to keep up the frame rate more. But I do suspect that it's actually a limit on MHL, that effectively it does cap the frame rate coming to the phone display at 30 frames a second, and likewise outputted to the HDMI capture. Now one of the things that I'm still trying to figure out with this particular game is how the multiplayer is working. I've actually on aeroplane mode at the moment, so let's not do that. Platinum Series is still to come. It's looks to be an add-on that they'll be adding in later, as it were, but still hasn't materialised just yet. Let's take a look at one last game. Just to explain, the way they've kind of broken the game down at Gameloft is to have these kind of boosts that you can also pay money for or use the bucks, as it were, which is the pay for credits. And so if I want to, I can add some extra top speed, a bit more acceleration, and if I want to again, I can even boost it a bit more by dropping some credits on there. And part of this is because you have to upgrade your car, and as the game kind of progresses, your car becomes less performance, or has less performance relative to the other cars on the track, and so effectively you have to pay to win. And now you can either use your kind of in-game credits you've been earning or the pay-for credits you can get from Gameloft. But ultimately, as this game progresses, if you haven't been upgrading your car, or if you're a little bit behind in your earnings, as it were, and can't upgrade, then you may find yourself having to dip your hand in your pocket and pay some money to beat the level. Like I say, it's typical Gameloft style. Oh, look at that lens flare. J.J. Abrams would be proud. It's typical Gameloft. It is a free-to-play game, but they know full well that to actually play this game to its fullest extent, you are probably going to have to put your hand in your pocket at some point, or take a very long, potentially frustrating path to the win. I'm playing this with the full assists on, which means braking assist as well as the line assists are on there, just to make things a little bit easier for myself. Why? Just because I'm getting used to the car physics, and because it's easier when I'm kind of demoing these games just to have the assists on. Otherwise I end up crashing into things a lot. Now I haven't actually tried this game yet with the Moga Pro controller, but there certainly doesn't appear to be any reason why it won't work quite beautifully. It's going to be interesting to try this out on the Ouya as well, if it's compatible. I will try sideloading that sometime today just to see how that works with the Ouya controller. But by and large, if you are sitting on the fence about getting this particular title, then don't sit any longer, go get it. It is fantastically well done, and it really does remind me of Gran Turismo on a mobile device. In fact, in some respects, it's better than Gran Turismo, because it didn't take them 7 years to release it and then only release a little demo. Sony. Hopefully they'll do a lot better on the PS4 and they won't keep us waiting too long for Gran Turismo this time round. But if you're needing your mobile fix of a top quality driving game, GT Racing 2 has everything in spades. Get out of my way. Now, one of the things I am trying to work out is how the multiplayer actually works, because I think it just uses ghosts, because when I've started multiplayer games, they've been very quick to start, unlike normal multiplayer games that have to do a lobby and everything like that. So it makes me think that your multiplayer is probably just racing against ghost versions of your of people on, you know, your Google Plus or your Facebook account, or generally within GameLoft's system. But I will try and confirm that at some point. But it just feels a little bit too nippy for, you know, a multiplayer game lobby and organising itself, etc. And also, I've not really seen what I would describe as any cavalier driving from my multiplayer opponents. It all seems just a little bit too on the rails to me. Normally you would see people crashing into each other on purpose, spinning off the track, and generally acting like nutters, and none of that really. It does feel very much like pre-adjusted ghost cars, probably drawing on data from, you know, your multiplayer, your social connections, as it were. Are we in first? Hooray! Here we go. But as you can see, I mean, the gameplay is just fantastic. Lovely, lovely graphics. Whoa, brake. Get around this corner. So, this is obviously running on a Nexus 5. Do ask any questions you have in the comments, and if there's anything you'd like to take a look at, I'd be happy to show you from this Nexus 5 device. We're doing all of this live, by the way, so you know what you're actually seeing now is coming directly off the Nexus 5 and streamed directly to YouTube. So do feel free to ask any questions. Now, one thing, just while I complete this race, is this Nexus 5 is actually running on the very latest Google kernel. It's running on DRT rather than the Dalvik. Now, the main difference there is, this is something new added for Android 4.4, is the way that Google kind of handles applications and their data. Under this new arrangement, instead of apps effectively unpacking themselves and rendering and doing all of their business at runtime, what Android does under DRT is to unpack all of that information previously. So when you first install an application, it will unpack all of the relevant information and make it available. Now what this does is, any app that isn't a game usually will load substantially faster than it will using Dalvik. Because what Dalvik has to do is unpacks the application, does all of its working, and then boots it up. Under DRT, what we do is we just hit the button and the application is accessed immediately and bumped straight into memory. Everything that Android needed to do has already been done. So let's come out of this for a second. I'm going to just show you how we get into that. So what you need to do is come into Settings, scroll down, and come into your developer options. Now, if you haven't got developer options yet, all you do, come in and double tap your build button and tap that, I think, 7 or 8 times, and it will come up and it will then say you've enabled developer mode. Come to your developer options, scroll down. Have I gone past it? Where's she gone? Runtime. Sorry, not Dart, it's ART. A-R-T, my bad. It's because of Google's just launched version 1 of their Dart JavaScript library. So I've just got a bit confused there. But you select the runtime, and at the moment, when you first get your Android 4.4 device, it will be defaulted to Dalvik. Come in, sit, hit Use Art, and save. Now what the device will do is it'll have to reboot itself. And then every single thing you've got installed on your device will have to be unpacked. Now that can take anything up to 5 to 10 minutes depending on the device. But once you've done that, the speed that applications can now open at, let me just find something, let's go with YouTube. The speed that applications can now open is quite remarkable. Now this won't make much of a difference for things like games, because they actually use a different kernel library, as it were, a different part of the SDK. And actually in some tests that I've seen done so far, the use of ART actually makes games a fraction slower at certain types of tasks. There's no massive speed increase, and you lose maybe 2.5 to 3% under certain loads. But when you're dealing with applications that are, you know, purely running on the device and aren't making use of, so just use Happy Geek, aren't making use of the Google Game SDK, as it were, you will find very, very fast load times. Just let me turn my airplane mode off so we can actually get some data. You suddenly realise quite how much stuff does require data when you have it turned off. But if we come into Happy Geek, and let's just close that down. There we go. And you can see the speed that everything draws. There is no pause or lagging, and that's because of this ART kernel, or runtime as it were. And what it's basically doing is, because everything's already been unpacked, it doesn't have to waste any time. All it can do is just grab the information, throw it into memory, get it onto the screen as fast as possible. If there is one thing that Android 4.4 is really all about, it's this. This is their massive, massive change. And you know, it makes a big, big difference to how Android is going to be taken forward, really. And really, in my opinion, Dalvik is not long for this world. Within maybe another year or so, they'll be switching over to this permanently, and the speed of Android is going to increase quite considerably. So let's have a quick look at some of the comments. Okay, Callum, Nexus 7 2012, I believe the actual, not the SDK, the actual ROMs have now been released onto Google, so you should be able to do an update manually. You don't necessarily need to wait for Google to push the update. You can go and grab it directly and then just flash it on using the usual Android tools, as it were, ADB, if that's your poison, or some of the third-party tools that have been released. There's a couple of GUI ones out there, as well as a few command line ones. So you don't necessarily need to wait for Google. If the source code has been released, someone will have compiled it, or you can grab a pre-compiled binary directly from Google usually. Also, unfortunately, immersive mode is only available when the developer has actually enabled it within the game. So the problem we have there is that so far I haven't found a single game that has actually been updated for immersive mode. But we can get pretty close to showing part of that, which is through the YouTube app, which I believe does go immersive, does it? I think it might only go immersive when it's actually playing a video, unfortunately. But by and large, Android 4.4 has been a bit of a revolution. On the surface, when it was first announced, I was like, there's not a lot here. It's all very under the hood. But wow, those under the hood changes are quite remarkable. It's obviously quite difficult to tell when you're kind of looking at a device like the Nexus 5 using the latest hardware, etc., because the big problem there is we've got the very, very fastest, So it'll be more interesting, for instance, Callum, when you get it onto the Nexus 7 2012, a device that wasn't the fastest by comparison when it was released, in my opinion, and has started lagging behind. I got rid of my Nexus 7 recently because it was just too slow in comparison to other devices I was using. It was becoming frustrating. But with Android 4.4, and if you switch to the ART runtime, obviously also with the Android 4.3 changes they made, which enabled trim support, you should find that the 2012 Nexus 7 starts to really fly again. In many respects, I may have to go and pick one up just to go and test some of these things out. The reason I've not gone for the 2013 Nexus 7 is they've put a Snapdragon S400 in it, or S4 Pro, or whatever it was called, S4 Pro. And I just can't fathom why you would put that chip in anything right now. Presumably it was a case they had them lying around from the Nexus 4 or something and still had inventory, but it's not the chip I would have chosen for a flagship 7-inch tablet today. Really, they should have gone for the S800 or the S600 at the bare minimum. Is there anything anyone would like me to show you on the Nexus 5? Is there anything that interests you at all? Any questions you have? One thing that I've noticed quite a bit is, as I've been using the camera on the Nexus 5, is it's not the best out of the box. Basically, Google have kind of hobbled the camera with some really poor settings choices, for instance, the autofocus speed, the bit rate of the images and video, for instance. And once you actually patch the Nexus 5 with a update from the XDA developers forums, one of the developers on there has been in and tweaked the camera, suddenly you have a camera that's actually better than the Galaxy S4 in low light conditions. Still, the autofocus is a little bit It takes a while to lock on. I'm going to see if we can do this. Let me just see if my cables are... So you can actually see this is actually all wired in right now. So I've not quite got the... There we go. So you can now see the speed at the autofocus is actually doing its thing. It's quite considerably improved once you've added the patch in comparison to the pre-patch levels that come on the Nexus 5 as standard. In my opinion, Google shouldn't have released the firmware like this. It was silly. It made a really poor job at kind of showing off how amazing the Nexus 5 camera is when it's so badly hobbled by software. And in part, it's this absolutely atrocious camera app that Google have shipped. It really is poor in comparison to many other camera apps out there. And the only thing I can think of is it was done deliberately because Samsung, HTC and the other primary partners, as it were, let's just throw a bit of contra on the background, the other primary partners, cameras and camera apps is kind of the thing for the big OEMs. It's the reason you would go and buy the $600, £500 smartphone. But actually, we've got a great camera in the Nexus 5 at $350, but it's being let down quite badly by the software that Google went with. Most of it can be tweaked, like I say, but it would be good if the camera app was just a little bit better. So, I really hope you've enjoyed this Androidizen Live episode 6. Hopefully it was better than sitting down and watching Saturday morning television anyway. If you're not a subscriber, please do subscribe. Do send this video to your friends, subscribe, share, like, and always please do comment. We love hearing what you think of the show, and we take all your feedback on board as we're developing our videos here. So please do tune in again next time. Hopefully we'll be back next week with another Androidizen Live episode 7.